Welcome into the shop, friends. First, I'd like to give a big thanks to SimpliSafe for sponsoring this video. More on that to come, and remember, there's no safe like SimpliSafe. Okay, so let's briefly talk about what I'm building and the challenges I've faced. Part of me feels like I've ventured into uncharted waters with this build, but when you've been a furniture maker as long as I have, you know every build can feel like uncharted waters. So let's just call it rough waters. So let's talk about the design. The table will go in a welcome lodge for a large camp here in the Texas Hill Country. The purpose of the table is to give the visitors a unique view of the camp property via this massive 38-inch diameter topographic carving you're looking at now. I wanted to display the CNC carving on a traditionally styled furniture base. A bit of a comparison between old school handcrafted techniques and modern day CNC machinery. If I'm going to bust out and do a lot of CNC work, I have to offset that with some hand tool work. That's just how I think. The legs are octagons with 3 mortise and tenon joints at the bottom. The lower stretcher resembles a wheel hub and helps strengthen the table so it can hold the weight of the wood carving. The legs are pocketed around the 40-inch diameter apron using pretty complicated joinery. Now, I owe you guys a bit of an apology because much of the build got lost on a faulty hard drive. It's okay though, because I still have plenty to share with you, and I want to start by doing something I don't normally do. Let's venture all the way to the end of this build to take a look at the finished table. Okay, I'm coming to you from the floor of my shop, which is a little bit odd, a little bit different. Obviously, I don't want to show the table. The CNC carving is in here. We're not showing that yet. That's for later in the video. I would put this up on the workbench, but it's too heavy to lift, so I'm going down to the floor to give you a little bit of a rundown of how the base was made, since unfortunately that footage is lost in that digital world out there somewhere. So anyway, this is a test leg. This is what I used to do all the test runs on the joinery. You can see here the pocket on this. This is what holds the apron onto the leg. Got a little spline in there, and then you've got the mortise on the bottom. This was all cut on the CNC. I made a cradle, a jig, set it on the CNC, and all 6 of these legs, this was all cut out there on the CNC. It actually was a really fun use of the machine, and it went pretty quick once I figured it out. But the trick was getting everything laid out properly. So really where I started, and you don't have to have a CNC. I use my CNC because it's just easy to do a lot of this. This is just a simple MDF jig. It's a 40-inch diameter, which is the outside diameter of my apron. And at 6 points, I have a V carve all the way through it, and it creates the 6 points where my legs need to go on the apron. So I use this to lay everything out. Mark on my apron where the leg goes, and then I cut with using my router, basically a dado across the whole length of the apron for that spline there to drop into, and it creates a really strong joint. It captures over the top of the spline, and it's very secure, very strong. And then this center stretcher system down here, it was all put together with mortise and tenon joints in the center. So the whole point of the stretcher really is to give this rigidity and strength because there's a lot of weight on that carving up there. Like I mentioned, there is a lot of footage over on the Patreon. There's a whole shop update. I think it's 30 minutes long. Longer than this video, just talking about the joinery. So what we're going to do, we still got some very challenging woodworking in front of us. First, some hand tool work to get this applied trim on the top and bottom built and put in place on the apron. And then we've got to get the top all carved and sanded and finished. A lot of trickiness to that. So let's get moving. Let's keep going forward and get to work on this applied trim. Okay, so on the applied trim, it just so happens that I had some walnuts, like small slabs hanging out at the top of the shop. They've been there for years that have a little bit of a curve radius to them. So I'm going to take advantage of that curve since this is a circle and that trim. I don't want it to necessarily be straight. I want it to try to kind of turn a little bit. So I'm just tracing out here along the bark edge, trying to match that curve and go in about 4 to 5 inches so I can rough out some parts for this trim. Take it over to the big Alder, just rough and cut those out on both sides. What we're going to do after we do this, I'm not going to show, is I'm going to cut, this actually is going to get 4 blanks. So after I cut these 2 out, I'll cut them in half lengthwise, and I'll have 4 blanks there. And then from those 4 blanks, we're going to stay on this Alder bandsaw set up to resaw, and we're going to resaw out 3 individual pieces out of each blank. So along with that, we'll get a little bit of, not only are we getting wood coming from the same slabs, but we're getting book matches within those individual pieces. So all the grain should flow real nicely across this trim. Once I get it resawn, I'm going to come over here to my planer and we're going to work it all down to thickness. Okay, let's take a really quick break here to talk about today's sponsor, SimpliSafe. Now, I've had SimpliSafe security systems set up on my home and on my house for probably over 5 years now. They help protect me from theft, fire, water damage, and most importantly, they protect the most important things in my life, which is my family and my children. Their system was named the best home security system in 2024 by US News and World Report, and I'm excited to tell you that they've just released their Active Guard Outdoor Protection program. So Active Guard is a really cool advancement in home security where traditional systems, they kick on after the intruder has broken into your house. The damage is already done. They already have time to steal valuables. But with Active Guard, it reacts in real time using advanced AI and real-time monitoring to detect any suspicious activity on your property before they even get to your home. Monitoring agents are notified. They can speak to the intruders. They can set off sirens. They can turn on your spotlights. And they can also obviously call the police. All this happens before a break-in can ever occur. And there's no other home security system that offers this level of active protection inside and outside. The advanced AI can identify familiar faces like family members, neighbors, and that way you won't trigger a false alarm. My favorite part of the system by far is the cameras and how they allow us to monitor the property inside and out. SimpliSafe has done an amazing job of integrating their cameras and the app all together so you get an extensive home security system that you can monitor 24/7. In this build, I did a 100-hour CNC carve. I have an indoor camera set up to monitor my CNC. So over the weekend as I was out doing things, I was able to pull up the camera, check on the CNC, make sure it was still running and there wasn't any issues. And then I also have a camera over at my pool, which is less for security and more to monitor my pool. So my wife and I have the app and we get notifications anytime there's a person in and around our pool area. We have 3 little kids, so that just helps protect us. If they wander in that area, we know they're not supposed to be there unless we're there. I've kind of found different ways to use their cameras, not only for protecting my property, but also for being able to monitor certain things on my property. Now, here's the great news. My viewers get 50% off their SimpliSafe home security system when you sign up for a core monitoring plan and you get your first month free. You just got to go to simplisafe.com/Andy Rawls to customize yours. Remember, there's no safe like SimpliSafe. The link is down in the description. You can help support my channel by going to check out SimpliSafe. Now let's get back into this build. Okay, so we're back in action. You get a good idea here of what this stuff looks like. It's really just pretty walnut. It was a strange piece because the center part was kind of rotten, but that outside quartered and ripped pieces were nice and really good color. So you can see here I've taped them back together, so I'm keeping my matches together, and I'm just going to cut this curve out on the bandsaw, kind of rough it out. And then we're going to go to a new machine, which I'm not going to talk about a lot about. This is an Alder shaper. I'm very excited to be in the shaper game, but I still have a ways to go. I'm going to do a whole dedicated video on this machine, but I got to get tooled up. I've only had it in the shop for a week maybe, and that was a router bit I had in it, not an actual shaper cutter. So I've got to get tooled, but we'll talk more about that machine in the future. Just a little tease there. So once I get that outside radius cut, I'm going to lay these out the way I like them. If you look at the table there, you can see the trim's going to go on the top of the apron. I've already got the bottom pieces on. And so I'm just making sure I like the way that grain looks. This is an extra piece from the bottom from the work I did. I always do the part it's not as important because the bottom you don't see. I do that first to kind of figure out my system. And then I can come back and do the really crucial part after I have kind of been through the process. We've got it all figured out. So go into the smaller Oliver and cutting out that back curve. So the front curve is established with the jig, and then this back curve is less crucial. I can trace it and freehand it out on this bandsaw. And even though we found a curved piece of walnut, it's still not quite curved enough for this radius, but I think it helps. And plus it's all coming from the same board. So that helps with the grain flowing through the whole top. I'm going to go through and do each one of these pieces, trace it out, cut it out of that blank, and then I'm going to have 6 pieces that are 3/8 thick by 1 inch and about 1/4 wide. And then from there, what we'll do is we'll go and actually hand fit each one to the tabletop. So if you look at the table, it's divided into 6 sections, and that leg goes all the way through the apron. So it's a dividing point for each piece of trim. So I don't have to worry about making a clean bevel cut there. All I got to do is cut it around the octagon of the leg. And that's what I'm doing here. I've traced it. I lay it on that octagon leg, trace it around, and then I found the most effective way to do this is with my little dovetail saw, real fine tooth saw. I can cut pretty accurately and close to those layout lines. And you can see here, this is how I laid it out. I just set it on there and traced it. And then once I cut it out with the dovetail saw, I can come back with a chisel and kind of fine tune it and chisel a little bit until it fits how I want it. So coming off the bench here, you can see how this slides on and fits in there nicely. The idea is the back of those trim pieces hit right on the back side of that leg, and they don't have to come together. There's just that leg kind of divides the 2 pieces. I really think it adds a nice look to the table. It was not in the original design. I added it as I went because I just thought it needed it. Here I'm putting a slight cove on the bottom of that, just a little detail that helps thin it. Doesn't look kind of as bulky, as just kind of thins the part a little bit. Another thing it does is it hides those bent laminations on the apron. So when you look down at the table, because you're going to be looking down at that carving, you're going to see all those individual pieces of walnut that are bent around in a circle. This hides that, and I think makes a much nicer, cleaner look in the transition from the actual table frame to the CNC carving, which we're going to get to see here soon. I glue and clamp all these on and clean up the glue really well. Everything's been sealed with shellac here except for the trim. So I just try really hard to get all the glue off so I don't have to sit in there with a chisel and chisel it. So I get water and just wipe it down real good and clean it up. All right, so we're headed over to the CNC. This is kind of the culmination of a lot of hours, multiple test runs, a lot of hours in Fusion 360, designing, testing tool paths, figuring out tooling, a whole lot of work. And I want to thank a couple people, Blake and Emil, who helped me figure a lot of this out. I couldn't have done this without them, so I appreciate those guys. Hopefully y'all get to see this and see how it all came out. What I'm doing here is screwing this blank down. So I have a vacuum table, so there's going to be suction through the vacuum onto those pieces of plywood. But when you release material off that big of a block, it can actually pull it up off the vacuum. So I screw it down and make sure it's solidly secured to that floorboard. So here's a look at the Fusion 360 cam. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 6 tool paths. The first one's going to be a contour, which cuts the circle. The second one is a rough pass with a 1/2-inch bit. It's about a 10-hour pass there. This is another rough pass with a 1/4-inch bit, a little bit finer cut. That's about another 10 hours. And then this is a face, which takes my waist on the outside and lowers it about 2 inches. So when I run this final pass, the cleanup pass, the stock holder doesn't hit my waist. I needed to clear the waist, so we did that with a face program. This is the parallel, so this is the final cut. With a 1/16 inch tapered bullnose, and it took about 80 hours to run that program. And then the last one, which went really quick, is it's called a project, which I don't know a lot about this toolpath, but it just cuts. I'm going to show you a simulation here, and it's just going to cut the property line, basically. Just cuts along a drawn line on the model and follows that contour all the way around and creates the property line. So I've got a really cool time lapse here lined up. I took photos of the whole thing over the course of over 100 hours of CNC time. Okay, so this is that final pass here, and honestly I was really nervous about this because I wasn't super sure if I had it figured out. And obviously after all that time on the CNC, I would hate for this program to be the one that just messed it up. But I can't tell you the level of relief I had once all that was done and it was good. Now, I don't show it a lot in this video. This is about to get really hectic here trying to cut this out by myself. Obviously this is not easy to do. A little bit of a pucker factor because I was worried about binding the blade and knocking it off. But what I was saying was that machine, I still wasn't very optimized. I think I could have shortened my tool cut time a lot, machining time, and it left a lot of kind of steps in the valleys and in certain areas that I had to sand out. And I probably put 6 hours of sanding into this blank after it came off the CNC. It looks really nice from this shot. But if you get in close and look, I think maybe the machine itself is just not up to the task. I mean, I don't know. It could have been the programming, but it just left these weird little steps on the Z where it was going up and down, and it took a lot to sand those out. And it got the worst down in the valleys. So I got a little bit of work to do to figure out how to do that CNC at the most optimal settings, but I'll get there. Yeah, I'm really struggling here if you can't tell. This is almost like practicing my climbing holds. So I'm trying to hold on to the contours on the table and spin it around and cut this circle out without binding the blade. It's Chester's bailing. He's like, I don't like this, I'm out. Finally get through it. Let's celebrate with just a little toss of a waist. All right, so back to the shaper. Again, brand new machine. Don't have all the proper cutters for this. Right now I've got a big flush trimming bit. That's a router bit, and I'm just using it to take off that final bit of waste. You can see how that's working there. I've got about a little over an inch there to clean up. I got a top bearing running on it. Sure is nice. That's this Oliver shaper. I cannot wait to share more with you all about it because we're gonna do some cool stuff on this machine. I'm excited about it. I just couldn't keep it out of the video. I know Oliver wants a different type of video, but I've started using it, so I couldn't keep it out of the video. All right, right here at the end it was a little bit tricky because that contour dropped and my bearing was just barely had room to run. And in fact, there was a spot there where I couldn't even run it. I just kind of had to hand shape that down and take that off by hand. All right, so I don't completely share all the sanding, but I had carving gouges out. I mean, I did a lot of work going in all those little valleys and taking tool marks out where that I don't know, the machine was doing some weird stuff, and it unfortunately just took a while. It took quite a bit of time. I also used little mop sanders that I actually found them on Amazon. You put them on your drill, and surprisingly, those worked really well. I bought a kit that I started with 80 grit and went all the way up through 220. So that was very helpful, but it couldn't get down in those low spots. I just had to get in there and wear my fingers out and sand out the valleys and try my best. If you inspected it thoroughly right now as it is finished, you could find a few little spots in there. You got to call it at some point. There's only so much sanding a man can handle. All right, it's time for finish. We got a pretty interesting little finish recipe for this. So as you can tell, we've got the property border in there. First thing I'm going to do is seal it with seal coat shellac. The property border there, I want that, originally we had just tried to scale the whole property into the circle, but it cut out a lot of their actual property, and they wanted to be able to see the entire property. So this is why we carved that property line in it. But also, to take it a step further, you can see how this starts to pop. It looks really cool. We're going to, all the outside topography that's not a part of their property, we're going to tint it a darker color. So it's going to make that inside color kind of pop more and draw your eye more to their section of property. Hopefully that makes sense. We're going to do it here in a second, so it will soon. I try not to put too much, try to shoot pretty light. I don't want to, obviously don't want to puddle up in valleys, and I don't want to build up too much finish on this because it's it's a carving. Ideally it would have an oil, but with what we're doing with the color here, shellac's the best thing to work with. So I've got to go through and tape off that property line all the way around with some blue tape. I'm not really like taping perfectly. I just want to cover their area, and the finish is not going to find its way down in that groove. So I can use that as my line and tape with my blue tape all the way around, and then come in and fill in the center section so none of that tint gets into that section. Basically what I do is I just use the same seal coat of shellac, and I got a little bit of brown and black trans tint, just kind of mixed up a dark color. And it's better when you do that, to mix it light and then maybe shoot a couple coats. I was able to do it on the first coat. It's a very slight change in color. You're not even really going to notice it in the video a whole lot, but it's there in person, and I think it really helps add a nice touch to the table. And this is it right now, and even right now in the video, it's not super easy to tell that we're actually darkening that outside section. But I promise you it's happening. You can see in the gun, if you look in the cup, you can see that dark finish in there. It almost looks black, but it takes a lot of color when you tint like this to really add color. That's why I like using this method, because you're not actually coloring the wood, you're coloring the finish. If we put color on this alder, it would look horrible. Alder you can stain alder really nice, but you got to do it really carefully. It's like pine, it can blotch really bad. Okay, so we peeled away the tape. Not really revealing much to you here yet. I'm going to come in before we hit it with the conversion varnish, and I got a steel wool here, just working down those rough spots. You know, I'm kind of using my left hand to feel the tabletop. That's how you sand finishes. You got to feel. So much of finishing is in feeling and finding the rough spots and sanding those out. So I had a 400 grit mop sander, so that helped a lot to come in and do the last bit and smooth it out. And what we're going to do is come in with a water-based conversion varnish. This is a pretty standard finish I use. I have a little bit of flat sheen left from an older project, so I'm going to shoot the flattest sheen I've got on this. I don't want a lot of gloss. I don't want a lot of shine to it. I want it to look pretty flat. So this is a conversion varnish, flat sheen, water-based. So it took a couple coats. I was hoping to only do one coat, because I just don't want to build up a big film finish on this. But usually with water-based, it's hard to get away with one coat, because it's going to raise the grain just a little bit. Even though I've sealed it twice with shellac, it still kind of popped the grain in some spots. All right, I want to take some time to share with you guys the Patreon. First, I want to say thanks to those who support me over there. It's a great opportunity for y'all to get a lot more behind the scenes footage of what goes on in the shops. I put updates up regularly. Those updates will be linked down in the videos they pertain to. I also do educational videos up there as well. And I just started a new benefit called the Lumber Exchange, where you can get drop-off from my shop mailed to you. You just got to pay the shipping. So this is the first batch that went out, some walnut, cherry, white oak, and then kind of an assortment, some spaltz pecan. Really cool feature. So if you want to help support the channel and get these perks, if that sounds fun to you, I would really appreciate it. You can find all that info in the description.